Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on this question: is mind or matter more real? We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith and Professor Ching. First, I would like to give chance Professor Smith.
Hey, Sharif, thank you so much for the topic today. The mind is a space-time that contains all of our potential. It manifests our thoughts, our feelings, and others. And the question on is mind or matter more real? They both are, and how we can begin to use things and work through that. Mind over matter is the sense that all matter is contained within the mind when you think about it, because we choose our thoughts and the feelings that create our physical life experience. So even the brain perceives our own creations, it perceives our own matter, so to speak, on it. The other point on this one that really is kind of interesting, if you go back and look at different religions, different areas, for example, the Tibetan monks in meditation, or even an athlete uses the power of positive thinking, uses mind over matter to win the big games. So there's some undeniable truth to the theory of mind over matter. And we see all the instances that can help support it and make it real. Uh, Mind without nothing really matters is the other concept you see here, is that for us to perceive the world as we look at us as humans, the human brain is the complex thing, takes and interprets the physical world for us and puts it in place and gives us the context for it. So the simple question of whether it is mind or the matter that's more real, they have to work at each other and work through the elements to be successful. So that is, I think, a really quick introduction.
Thank you, Professor Ching.
Yes. This is mind or matter more real? This is a philosophical question. Okay. And currently, it's very old, but currently scientists try to put a new twist on it. Okay, but post science has advanced knowledge vision by 4,000 years beyond science and can use this question to detect the cultural level of a person. Okay, according to Goodell, Bertrand Russell, and Kenneth Arrow, logic is incomplete, inconsistent, and impossible. In other words, today, knowledge based on knowledge are not reliable. No knowledge is acceptable. So if you ask this question, mind or matter for more real, you try to give some logical answer to this. Basically, you define your mind, you define your matter. Also, you define what is real. This are logical question. Okay, and the Goddard, Russell, and the Arrow all against the logic. Okay, they don't think logic can lead to anything. Okay, so what is going on? If we don't have any reliable knowledge, what is why do we have this universe existing? Okay, that is basically the question. You see, you have to start from something even more fundamental than just asking what is mind or matter. Okay, so therefore today there is no solution for the question. strictly speaking, because logic is useless. If you don't use logic, how do you answer such a question? Okay, so I have been working with Lofty Sadeh for over 20 years. In the last 10 years, we work very intensive, very closely together. And he is the father of fuzzy logic. Okay, when you have fuzzy logic, you allow solutions that is not perfect, that is complete, not complete based on logic to exist, as long as you specify the range for which the solution apply. Okay, basically, fuzzy logic says that the conjunction of the range of tolerance and the range of possibilities is the range of solution. In other words, there can be solution if the range of tolerance and the range of possibility overlap. Okay, that makes any question have an answer, but that doesn't mean this answer is a solution. Okay. Even more difficult for this whole picture with fuzzy logic, I have construct a new form of philosophy which is based on cultural level quotient. Okay, there are 16 levels. Cultural level quotient, each level is based on the method of reason. Okay, so for example, today we have scientific culture. Most Western nations subscribe to the scientific culture, which is based on empirical verification. Okay, and from 1 to 8 are fuzzy. Method from 1 to 8 are fuzzy. Method from 9 to 16 are exact. In other words, fuzzy logic will produce result. According to Gödel, Russell, and Arrow, exact logic cannot produce result. So scientific reasoning belong to level 11. And in other words, the human race at this point cannot really say that they can produce logical results. Okay, so there is this real problem with today's culture. Okay, nobody seems to be able to really overcome the difficulty raised by Gödel, Russell, and Arrow. Okay, there is no solution. Strictly speaking, there is no solution. Okay, for example, the scientific culture is based on empirical verification. Okay, and the one level above this is the the social science culture. Okay, which nobody really understand today in the scientific world. That is, you have to obey complete mathematical rigor. Okay, this complete mathematical rigor requires us to consider reality to infinity. In other words, if you do not consider to infinity, you cannot include all the factors into your consideration. So, let's define from the most fundamental point of view, based on fuzzy logic. Reality consists of nature and man, where what is not created by man is created by nature. In other words, there are two parts to reality, man and nature. Okay, both of which can change reality. Okay, so look at the reality. You see the earth, the living system. The earth is not created by man, it's created by nature. Okay, man is not created by man, man is created by nature. Okay, so there's almost little or nothing is created by man. But man has created some scientific objects, such as a car, an airplane. Okay, and nature has created the human. Okay, the difference is, in other words, this is mind or matter more real. Okay, you see, this question at each different level of culture, a different way of reasoning, they would see this question, answer this question differently. Okay, we're at the level of a scientific culture. This, we cannot define what is mind, what is matter. Okay, nature created mind, nature created matter. Okay, for example, in my case, I'm the founder of pole science. I have looked over this cultural level quotient. I would even not consider matter, well defined, because you can never detect matter except through the force created by the field. There is no matter. Okay, you also in physics you talk about classical mechanics, quantum mechanics. That is a big problem. Okay, classical mechanics depend on old observation. Quantum mechanics depend on new observations. Now we have new observation conflict with the old observation. So people come up with new theories and try to describe the classical mechanics, quantum mechanics. In my opinion, if you discover new phenomena, if science is based on empirical verification, you should start to formulate theory only based on the most accurate observations, not to look into the back old observations which are not exact, not correct. Okay, so you need to throw away all the wrong observations. Just use the new observation. Okay, let's formulate problems that belong to the new observation. So this again is contradictory to the way that the higher level culture would look at things. Okay, the higher level culture will look at something based on today or based on the future. Okay, this habit of looking back into the past for future prediction is a habit of scientific culture. Only thing you can compare use for future prediction is when the past and the future are invariant. If it does not change, then it would go into, they can use for future prediction as input for future prediction. Okay, so let me just give some example, of what of the people who are talking here. Okay, I'm apologize to offend them. Okay, because I'm pretty sure they will talk as scientists. Okay, because they are trapped in this fishbowl of scientific culture. Okay, they would say that everything dependent on observation, but it's quite obvious to pole science now that we have social science which depend on the future. and you have to take into consideration of all the future expectations into consideration to make a decision today. Okay, so it's a totally different picture. Okay, and you also in life science you have to create something which lasts permanently. You see, today in the scientific culture, everything created for temporary existence. Okay, but this are the culture level from 9 to 16. Okay, and all of it are considered invalid according to Kierkegaard, according to Bertrand Russell, according to Kenneth Arrow. Okay, because they are based on exact logic, which is invalid by the very careful analysis, philosophical analysis of these people, not just three of them. Actually, there's a long list of people, but these three are the most famous and the most indicative. The Kierkegaard think it's logic is incomplete. Okay, Bertrand Russell think it's inconsistent, and Kenneth Arrow think it's impossible. So basically, you see, this you're asking a question which is a philosophical question, and it can test the speaker's cultural level. Okay, I'm saying I have gone through this culture many levels up, and I see that what the question itself as it stands, it is the question is not clear. It's invalid according to the foundation of logic. Okay, even the question is invalid. Even if you force yourself to answer it, each culture will answer in a different ways. Okay, so there are 16 ways of answering the question. If you belong to religion, then you will answer it to say, "Oh, the Bible says so." So, if you belong to science, you will say, "Oh, it's observe." We observe matter, we observe mind. Like David just said, he's a scientist. Okay, strictly speaking, biological, he cannot make a we cannot produce a reliable solution based on logic. Okay. And you want to make valid solution, you have to go up to fuzzy logic, where the answer is where there's a conjunction of range of tolerance and range of possibilities, which will form the range of solutions. Okay, so I'm saying a great deal here because I don't think what they say are valid. There's no way for them to produce any valid answer to this question. You see, according to fuzzy logic, they cannot produce valid solutions. Also, the definition of all these words, mind, matter, and the real. Okay, this question asks for people to just engage in general discussion without any possible solutions. There are so many problems like that. Okay, metaphysical problems, no problem can have any solution. And also, the real concrete difficulty is people, logicians, philosophers have already decided that the logic is not reliable. So even if you try to come up with some solutions based on cultures that are insufficient, there's nothing they can say. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is this: students or audience who view this, okay, they should. I don't think anybody who's not in philosophy will be able to understand what I'm saying here. Okay, this is subject belong to philosophers who making random speculations. Okay, but there are also technical people who produce solutions. Okay, and the solutions, has a solution has to have a certain way to define what is a solution. Okay, and by today's exact logic, all the solutions are invalid. Okay, but once you move into fuzzy logic, you see that you can make some kind of statement about valid solutions about this question. Okay, but each cultural level, each way of reasoning will produce a different way of looking at this problem. Okay, so if you ask, is the mind or matter more real? Okay, I would say, okay, you do need the mind and the matter. I would probably, if I use a high culture, I say no, never in history has any matter be observed. That is logic. Okay, you only observe the force produced by fields. Okay, so this word matter is in question. Okay. Okay, if you have enough field, you produce a mind. Mind will visualize, what is real, what is not real. Okay, what is real, what is not real? What do you mean by real? Real is reality consists of nature and man. Okay. The way I would talk is not at any level of today's society. Okay. So in other words, what I say will not be understandable to the general audience. And what the general audience says, even at the highest cultural level, they are invalid according to some of the most advanced thinkers in philosophy. So you have brought out one question, and also there's so many other questions similar to this. And they force people engage in general discussion without any solution, even before they start to say anything. Okay, and they know it, and they keep talking about it. This is just, try to catch fish in muddy water. Things are just so random. Okay, and here with post science, we put some definite answer for this. Okay, and I think this since we have three of us here, four of us here, we should sort of openly discuss this. Okay, to see if which point makes what sense. Okay, because it's such a wide field. It's a question which is basically related to so many questions that will have no answer. Okay, and once somebody try to answer it, each person who answers it will reflect his cultural level or his way of thinking, way of reasoning. Okay, David just answered it just perfect. It's just a scientific culture. Okay, which is already about 4,000 years behind post science. Okay, we see so many faults with the scientific culture. Okay, also
thank you, Professor Ching. We have
accept.
other speakers. We have to give them chance. Yes, Professor. Thank you.
Okay.
Professor Donald. Yeah.
Well, I think that I agree with a lot of the things that Professor Ching said. I mean, we do have to start at the beginning and ask ourselves the question of what we mean by minds and matter. I mean, sometimes I ask myself, is the idea of a mind even a useful concept? I mean, I think I kind of disagree with Dr. Chin in one sense, is that I feel that our observations are important because it's something that we have to be able to communicate with each other. And human communication is basically the core that allows human beings to be able to do things do the unusual things that we do. And a key to communication is that we have some sort of a shared reality. And whether that and people have often asked the question of what is reality and what is real. And so that gets to the question of what is matter. And so you might ask the question then, I think philosophers have asked for a very, very long time about the question of whether our perception is perceiving something that's like fixed, that's completely independent of us, or whether our brains in some way are creating what we perceive as reality. And I think I agree with Dr. Chin in that sense too, is that in a way, it really doesn't matter, because what we perceive as reality and what seems to be the reality to us is something that we work together on and we act on. So it makes us, we have a shared view of what we think reality is that causes us to coordinate our actions so that we actually do things together. I think probably the greatest logician that ever lived, and a lot of people share my views. I mean, Russell stole symbolic logic from him, and there are quite a lot of other things that he came up with, is Charles Sanders Peirce. And Charles Sanders Peirce also, among other things, invented the philosophy of pragmatism. And I'm very, not directly Peirce's version of it because it got modified over the years, but I pretty much consider that if I chose a philosophy that I'm most would call myself, I'd say pragmatism is the one that I'm. And Peirce made an interesting observation, which he said, truth is an infinite number of observations made by an infinite number of people over an infinite amount of time. So he was basically saying it's a limit, like in calculus. This is something you can never actually get to. But the point of the matter of it is that he's looking at it as something that's social, not something that's external. He said, he also mentioned that reality is something that happens whether you want it to or not. And there are things like right now, no one is going to say, well, I don't believe in gravity, and so I'm going to jump off a bridge. I mean, it's not going to work out for you. There's a lot of things that are out there, but Peirce also invented the term that's kind of, if you look up science, a scientific method in this Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or other places, one of the things that they say is core to modern scientific method is what's called fallibilism. And that's also from Charles Sanders Peirce. And fallibilism is the idea that no matter what we know or what we observe, we're always going to be able to invent new methods and new theories about what we're seeing and new tools to observe things so that we'll change our view. And when he was referring to quantum physics, right now, the most popular view of quantum physics is the standard model or the extended standard model. And to some degree, we have a sort of a handle on what we think it quote matter is based on the extended standard model and quantum fields and all these various kinds of things. I can get my toes into it a little tiny bit, but it's very complicated. But on the other hand, there's several other models that seem to mathematically work as well, like string theory. And so when we're describing matter and describing the universe, we have different ways of doing it that work. And so the question gets to be then is how do we look at any of these particular ways and decide which one's true and which one's not true? And ultimately, the answer is that multiple people can make multiple observations that come out the same way, so that we can have different people. So does that mean that we've actually discovered reality, or that we're actually observing reality, or we're actually observing matter? No, because of fallibilism, the idea of fallibilism, 100 years from now, we might discover quantum physics was off the mark and come up with some whole new theory of how everything works. So I agree with what he was saying, is that we don't now, and we won't ever have a complete definition of what matter is. But what we do have is, because we have the beliefs that we have about quantum physics right now, it's allowing us to build quantum computers. It's allowing us to start doing amazing things. And all of the steps that we've taken in science or scientific things have allowed us to take steps, but the steps are taken because of the fact that many of us observe the same thing, and we can, based on what our observations are, we can do things that one person can do and another person can do, and they get the same results. And so that in a sense is what reality is. Reality is the shared knowledge that we have, that all of us can that we share, and that we can act things with. In sociology, we call that, we say that knowledge is socially constructed, and that infuriates some scientists who don't quite understand what that means, because they're saying, no, reality is reality. You can't possibly have, how could it be constructed? It's reality. But the point of it is that if it's real to us at any given point, but then if our models of it change, and what it is to us changes, then really what's happening is that we're getting together and agreeing that what we observe is this, but that is just our communal view of what things are. I mean, there's people right now, there's still people who believe the earth is flat. There's still people who believe all these kind of bizarre things about the world. And as far as they're concerned, it is real to them. It's completely real to them. And they have groups of people who can discuss it, and they actually can take actions, and the results of what they do are the results that they expect. Just the same way that as scientists, we act in results that we expect. So that then goes back to our minds. And to me, saying sometimes I wonder if minds are actually things that cause things, or their explanations. Because we see each other do things, and we say, oh, that person just did something. And then we ask ourselves why. And they say, well, there must be some cause. Okay, well, what's causing it? Okay, let's invent this thing called minds. But we can't find minds in the brain. And in a way, they're kind of a convenience to explain something, explain a bunch of complicated different things that are going on. But even given that, I mean, it's useful. It is a useful explanation, and fitting into what I just said, a mind is something that does cause things and allow us to act. And in order to build reality, I have to know what I have to believe I know what you're thinking. I have to believe I know what you believe is real. And so in that case, my minds and matter, in a way, sometimes are sort of the same thing, because if things are socially constructed, then that requires our minds to be able to do that. And I'm going to end there, but I also want to mention that there's a whole thing in philosophy about the idea of um, basically idealism, and the whether what there is about reality and what reality consists of. And it's a really interesting topic. I think it's really interesting to look at what Kant and Hegel and people like that thought about it, because it's a very fascinating topic. And maybe I could interject a teeny bit of it when I come back. Bye. See you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Dev.
Sharif, this concept is so much fun with the definitions and things, as we've already begun to see, because, one definition of the mind is it's the element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world, their experiences, their ability to think and to feel, and the facilities of consciousness and thought. And, Webster even says it's the element or the complex of elements in an individual that feels, perceives, thinks, wills, and explicitly reasons. And we see that in many of the examples and things that have been used. A good example is if you go way back in history when languages were just being formed, and you begin to see, and people, how would people use their mind to look at reality of colors, for example, and begin to decide what is red, what is yellow, what are other colors like that, and bring them into a context that the mind and the matter are real together. If you go and look at some of the old ancient texts, the color blue was often referred to as just being dark or being an absence. And as you thought about it as you looked at an ocean or a body of water. But then we got the concept of blue, and we have a universal construct with people who understand that language of what the color blue is in the physical world. Well, that is how mind over matter really works as you go through the elements of trying to use it. And let me just use a science example a minute. Sharif, I have an object here, and your eye focuses on the object in my hand. Do you know what your brain does? Your brain sees this object upside down. I mean, the back of your eye, your cornea sees this object upside down. Then your brain translates it and puts it in the context that you saw it out in the real world. So I have the object, my cornea sees it upside down, then my brain translates it back. So is that mind over matter? Yes, it is. And you begin to see the elements like that. And throughout philosophy, throughout religions, throughout even science, we're seeing the fact that the mind is a really powerful. In healthcare, for example, the placebo effect is very real. A lot of people can just have their mind perceive that they're receiving a drug that can be helpful for them. The drug can just be sugar or other things like that, an innate element. But yet the mind is so powerful that the body responds to the mind saying, this placebo is going to help you be better. This placebo is going to make you well. So this is another example in science where mind and over matter work pretty well when you look at the consequences of that. Let me give you one other example in that we're seeing in science today. We've heard about neural links, we've heard about direct brain stimulations and things to get it to work. Well, that is really true. I can, just by using electronic stimulation of your brain, make you see objects that are not real, make you see things that are not real. So is it the mind? the mind is what gives us all of our reality. And to me, that's what this question is the mind is what matters, because it helps us understand what is there, what is real. And without our mind, there would be nothing there. There would be no identity, no recognition, there would be no understanding. So my simple answer to this is yes, the mind is the most important part for things to be real. So Sharif, I hope I've been direct enough without having to go too long.
Thank you, Professor Cheng.
Okay, after hearing Don and David talk, you see, I have to say I spent 8 years in the Department of Philosophy in UC Berkeley, working with Paul Feyerabend. Okay, Paul Feyerabend, he wrote 2 books. One book is Against Method. Basically, it says it's against the scientific method. Another book later on, it's called Farewell to Reason. Okay, that is the begin. Actually, with Don and David, let's just make example of what we mean by against method, what we mean by farewell to reason. Okay, because anything higher than that, it's way beyond. Most David and Don, I'm sure they're not philosophers. Okay, Don has read some philosophy, but this philosophy, the Peirce and Hegel, they summarize this philosophy. Okay, they want to be the encyclopedia of philosophy, but they are not creative. They are not advanced thinkers. Okay, this just summarizes philosophy, which make them appear to the general population. Okay, so let's just focus on just this one place, scientific culture. What's wrong with the scientific culture? Okay, Don mentioned something that's interesting. He said you observe things and you have Charles Peirce. He tried to say you do everything by observation. You see, all this observation can go back to history. Okay, I had some communication with some very famous historians. I told them history consists of 2 types of data. One type of history is invariant. Another type is variant. Okay, example, invariant is something like gravitation or some observation, scientific observation, which you observe once, then you observe again. Gravitation, you can, or speed of light, something but not change much. They do change, but they do not change very much. So they're invariant. There are another group of information which are variant data. Okay, let's just consider as data. Invariant data and variant data. Scientists deal with invariant data. But science is just part of historical study. So historical data consists of invariant and variant. Example of variant data is such a thing as the price. Okay, you have an ounce of gold, you can never say that you pay the right price for an ounce of gold. Okay, you make a decision. You cannot, the decision depend on all future expectation. You expect what's going to happen, then finally you consider all the way to infinity, then you, based on your expectation, you make a decision. Based on your expectation, you produce a price. Okay, these are variant data. They never stay the same. They change continuously to infinity. Okay, so important, price and the decision are much more important than any of the scientific observation, scientific discovery. Okay, no matter how much scientific discovery we made today, we cannot solve a single crisis, financial crisis, health crisis, nothing. Okay, environment crisis, nothing. Okay, because we don't have the solution of value. You see, value is a variant data. Okay, in other words, science is just, it's wrong, okay, according to reality. You look at all this data, what you need to do is you want to look over all the data, concerning certain things, certain decision. Then you make a decision which is a variant data. Okay, you are stuck with all this invariant stuff. The most important thing are variant data. That is going into social science. Okay, now we're stuck in science. The whole society is stuck in science. We never move up. We just say, just do everything by observation. That is incorrect. Okay, the correct way is you want to determine a value, determine a price or decision. You make a decision. You have to look at all the expected future. Based on that, you use mathematics to relate them rigorously to your price. Then you input all this invariant data. You cannot variant data. You cannot use variant data. You can go to the stock market, look at past stock prices. You can look at real estate, look at all the past real estate prices. It's no use, okay? Because price depends not on the past, but on the future. You have to look at all the future expectations. And based on that, you have a rigorous mathematical relation to calculate the price. Anytime, you see, the problem with price is anytime the future expectation changes, you must recalculate. Okay. Human beings, supposed to do this. Okay. You have a system which determines price. Anytime future expect change, you recalculate the price. That is human being. Okay, but nature, okay, according to Spinoza, nature is God. Okay. What nature can do is this. Nature made a plan, okay, made a decision. He constructed the living system. Once he constructs the living system, he's no longer there to interfere. The living system just unfolds. Okay, and it works, according to all of us here present, it works very well. Okay, in other words, God can make one decision and need no longer to recalculate. Human beings have a price system. Anytime future expectation changes, you need to recalculate. Okay, so the same is loan crisis. I was the leader of all the appraisers and the professional commercial brokers. We propose a solution of value to the Federal Reserve. Okay. In other words, you need to recalculate anytime future expectation changes. But the Federal Reserve and the whole society want to use the market comparison method, okay, which is the cause of all this financial crisis. You keep the price rigid. Okay, price is a variant data, variant quantity. You cannot keep, you need to recalculate anytime future expecting changes. Okay, if the interest changes, the price change. Okay, so you want to continue to follow this. Okay, this is contradictory to what Don said, what David said. They are stuck in this invariant data. Okay. Invariant data is relatively, unimportant in comparison to variant data, which concludes what the final decision should be. Okay. So just by this one case, the scientific method is an obstacle to the progress of knowledge. But this is just the beginning. See, I studied with Paul Ahmed. He's again the scientific. That's only the beginning. Okay. what we were talking about is we talk about empirical exact logic. Okay, by the way, this talk should be about logic. If you're not talking about logic, you're not a philosopher. You're just a man from the street. You know this topic, it's never going to be solved. Okay, and only the people who think most fundamentally can come address this question: is mind or matter more real? Okay, another question is exact logic valid? Okay, three top philosophers, Goddard, Russell, and Arrow, say exact logic is not valid. Okay, then what we are doing is this. We're talking about science, we're talking about social science, value. Both of them deal with exact logic. So both of them, even I gave you a presentation of what's wrong with science, it's not valid because it's based on exact logic. You see, what beyond this social science value determination is life, creation of life. What is life? Okay. It has to extend to permanent, to infinity. It's designed, DNA designed for permanent existence. Okay, so you can no longer use DNA is logic. It's 0, 1, 2, 3. You see, it's logic. It cannot be based on fractions. You see, that's not accurate enough. You got to be more accurate than your social science. So you have to go with exact logic. But all this, according to logicians, the solution is invalid. So what makes them valid? So you have to go up another 8 levels. So we are stuck here on level 11, and we have to go up to 10, 9, then only 1 to 8 produce valid solution based on range of tolerance, range of possibility, range of solution. All that below this, all this solution that I presented for life and for value and the scientific, they are all exact logic. They are not even valid. These logicians, they have really shown that they are not valid. Okay, so we'll address a question which will be talked about permanently. That's not unusual because fuzzy logic has been designed to solve varying the problems which change continuously to infinity. So in other words, fuzzy logic designed to solve problems that looks unsolvable. They're open-ended problems. Okay, and in other words, all this talk about scientific view is a very low culture and got our society stuck in this place where no crisis has been solved. Okay, we have a society that's very dangerous. You see, cannot solve any financial crisis. We know they cannot solve it. Health crisis, the pandemic, it was created by nature and solved by nature. Okay, if you look at it very carefully, you see that human being cannot address the problem of value, cannot address the problem of life. Okay, and we are still clinging to this scientific culture. So what we need is raise the cultural level, another raise the way we reason. Okay, we cannot reason partially like in science. We must have complete logic, complete reason. We must reason all the way from beginning to the end. Okay, in other words, if you have a chain of reason, okay, if it's incomplete, what's the use of this chain? Okay, a chain must have all its link provided, and it can hold the truth. Okay, and all this, this. In other words, the society today is in no position to solve all the crises, and this question is open-ended question which will last us until the end of time. It's an open-ended question in philosophy. The only use I can see is it allow people to express themselves so that their cultural level can be detected. You see, so far David and Donald, they're scientists. Okay, I admit they know pretty much know what science is about. But I would say science is just the beginning of knowledge, and it cannot do anything. You see, it's pretty much stuck. You know, and this question, it's useful for philosophers to analyze this. If you have students who are listening who are philosophy students, they probably get some idea of what I'm talking about. You know, but it's a philosophy question, and I'm, you know, Don and David, they are scientists. Okay, scientists, you know, philosophy doesn't really seem to get, you know, and my suggestion, you should start with Paul Feyerabend or even with Thomas Kuhn. You see, Paul Feyerabend is sort of like a teacher level of Thomas Kuhn. You see, Thomas Kuhn is just a student. He's a student of history of science. You see, you know, and he's a philosopher. Thomas Kuhn.
Well, I've read Structure of Scientific Revolution 3 times.
Mr. Donald.
Yeah. Well, you see, you read this. Do you believe what they are saying?
I do, but I don't think you understand what I've been saying. But I want to start out with, I don't think you understand me one bit. But I want to say with David, go back to what David said originally, which is that just mentioned to him that his definition of mind is sort of what I've been saying, is that it's a wonderful definition. It explains everything, but it actually it doesn't really tell us anything about it. In other words, it just basically says, well, you know, minds do this and minds do that, but it doesn't really tell us, you know, it's what I said in the first place, minds are explanations, not causes. And so it basically and that's a kind of a difficulty with it. When I was talking about Kant and Hegel, they were enormously influential, and Hegel's view was that our physical body, we had built-in filters that made us see the world the way that it was, and that we couldn't actually see what he believed, that there was an external reality that we couldn't actually see because we had filters. And the filters were that we had built into us the idea of up and down, and the idea of straight lines and various kinds of things, which to some degree turned out to be a little bit accurate. But I don't know. That's just it doesn't really go anywhere. But one thing that he did talk about was the idea of the synthetic and the analytic. And so the synthetics, first off, if nothing you say is reality. So you can make statements about reality, and the statements can be true or false, but it isn't reality. So and so basically Kant talked about synthetic statements, which were statements that were true because what you were talking about was true. For instance, if you said that woman's wearing a red dress and she was wearing a blue dress, then the statement wasn't true. So they're statements about reality or about what's observable. And then there was analytic statements which were true just because they were true. And that's the basis of deductive logic, which is statements like unmarried men are bachelors. They're true just because they're true. And that's really the basis of deductive logic. When we're talking about logic, it's very important to realize that there's no logic per se. There are several different types of reasoning, and one of them is deductive. And deductive logic is basically tautologies. But then there's inductive logic, which is basically logic where we guess at cause and effect based on repetition of patterns. So Russell had a funny thing about that, where he talked about that. Well, one example, before I say that, one example is that because the sun comes up every day, or we perceive the sun is coming up every day, we assume that the sun is always going to come up. And so that's a pattern. Russell's thing was that the turkey, every morning at sunrise, the farmer comes in and feeds the turkey. And so the turkey reasons that every morning the farmer is going to come in and feed it. But on Christmas Day, the farmer comes in and chops its head off and eats it. So that inductive logic is an example of why inductive logic doesn't work. But the most important type of logic that we use is abductive logic. And abductive logic is kind of the basis of science. And what that is guessing. And it's forming hypotheses. And the whole thing about observation is that if we make a guess about something that we think is going to work for us, whether we're guessing that car is going to stop at a light, or we're guessing that if we build the Large Hadron Collider, that we're going to be able to have an energy enough that we're going to be able to detect the Higgs boson. No matter what we're doing, no matter what guesses that we're making, which we're doing constantly in life, we're making these guesses. Ultimately, once we make the guess, it's important that we have some way of deciding whether our guess was valid or not. And ultimately, that's what science is. Some people make the mistake of thinking, what Kuhn was talking about was there's the philosophy of science and the scientific method, but then there's also the sociology of science. And so what Kuhn was talking about is that within science, you develop a social structure. So when scientists, when somebody, let's say for an instance, writes a paper about something that gets a lot of recognition, that person can potentially become a professor at a university. And then that person teaches what it is that they learned and studied when they wrote that paper. And then the students will learn that, and they'll take it as being true because that famous professor did it, and this famous professor wrote books about it. And this will propagate out so that more books are written about the subject, and this gets taken to be true. This doesn't have anything to do really with science per se. It's the sociology of science. It's just the social structure of what happens that in a way it's called science. But then what Kuhn was talking about in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, was how over time they find discrepancies. And these discrepancies would mount up to such a point that they'd have what was called a paradigm shift, which is where they just basically threw out the old stuff. But that was very difficult to do because they'd have to rewrite the textbooks. They'd have to, kind of sideline these tenured professors, and it was a huge amount of social work social change, because people had so much invested in the old paradigm. And that was what Kuhn was talking about in The Structure of Scientific Revolution. But again, going back to science itself is, it's important to remember that science does not in any way ever have fixed knowledge. So the idea that there's invariant in science is flat wrong. It's just wrong. It's not science. And so, I mean, I'm just I just think that that's, an absolute critical point. And so I think that people are attacking the paradigms, the sociology of science, but they're not looking at the actual philosophy of science itself. And the thing about observations that we're saying is that the observations are simply a question of, once we make a hypothesis, is there some way that we can decide whether or not the hypothesis is going to be useful? So I think useful is a better term than valid, because, again, we don't ever have truth. That's nothing that we can ever get to. So, but what can happen is that a large number of people can test this hypothesis and all come out with the same results. And if a large number of people come out with the same results, it allows us to be able to do things in the world, to act. And I want to say one point about that is, my first degree was in linguistics, and I've been studying linguistics consistently ever since, and I'm not that young. Linguistics requires an extremely large amount of philosophy. So I've been studying philosophy consistently for a long, long, long time. And one of the things that happened in philosophy was several people kind of threw out historical philosophy, and what was called the linguistic turn, which took place actually partially as a result to the group of philosophers, which Russell was one of them, that were called positivists. And the positivists were philosophers that believed that we could map reality to symbols, and then take symbolic representation of the world and actually work out logically what was happening in the world. And the magnus opus of that was Russell and Whitehead's Principia Mathematica, which then another logician named Kurt Gödel showed that it couldn't really work, because it was always going to be self-referential, because within the language, the logical language that Russell and Whitehead developed, you could make this sentence is false, basically. And as long as you could do that, you couldn't actually build a system. And so what Wittgenstein realized was that that there was ambiguity within, that any symbol was going to be ambiguous. And that actually, the key paper on that is a paper called it was by The Two Dogma of Empiricism. And I don't know why his name, it's early in the morning, my coffee hasn't hit, it'll come back to me in a second, but it's considered often considered the most important philosophical paper of the 20th century. And it was basically, he talks in that paper about how Kant's separation between synthetic and analytic wasn't really totally real, because we are influencing our observations by our belief in what it is that we're looking for. So we really can't completely separate logic from our own social worlds. And so in order to be able to actually understand things, we have to understand that our social reality is going to always influence what it is that we look for and what we look at. And scientists know that. I mean, that's a key part of science. And so so in the end, mind and reality aren't completely separate, and they can't be completely separate. So it's mind and matter can't be completely separate. And I'm personally believe that our brains are the source of source of minds in a sense. I also want to mention one other thing. We don't know exactly how language evolved. So making statements about saying that, oh, well, that suddenly we decided that there was color and things like that it actually is probably incorrect, because what language seems to be most is, it's just something that we use to coordinate our actions. And language, as we, bees and all kinds of creatures use sounds and things to be able to coordinate their actions. And human beings started out that way, and it became more refined. So anyway, and so minds are partially something that's in our brain, but partially something that's in all of our brains that that are created by us communicating and working together and trying to do things together. And then ultimately, that's what science is just a way of making shared guesses, so that we can guess things together and have a way that we can agree on whether the guess is a good guess or a bad guess. So that's my concluding statement.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. This is a very good discussion. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government agency, corporation, and academy. Thank you, Professor David Smith, Professor Ching, and Gunal, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care. Bye.